Ideally, you're doing well on all fronts. They're all important. So the reason I say pick one is because I think for a certain stripe of highly perfectionistic person, and many advisors are in that group, I think it becomes sort of a new thing to become anxious about, like, oh, I'm not having enough fun. I got to have more fun today or whatever. So I'm just trying to get folks to work towards incrementalism and sort of take one step in the right direction. But yes, ideally, they're all important.
Welcome, Model FAs. David DeSell here, president of Model FA and your host of the Model FA podcast. Really excited about our two guests that we have today. Oftentimes, we have just one guest on our show. So always a pleasure to have some extra folks on here. With that being said, I'm even more excited because we originally had Eric Clark from Orion on our podcast, and we're in the final stages in basically shaking out the details with a Model FA and Orion partnership that I'm super excited about. So having some additional members of their team on today, we have Rusty Vanneman and Dr. Daniel Crosby. So let me go through some bios, help set the stage, and then we'll get rocking and rolling. So Rusty serves as the chief investment strategist for Orion Advisor Solutions. He's an industry veteran with more than 30 years of investment experience. Rusty is the host of Orion's The Weighing Machine podcast and authored the book Higher Calling, a guide to helping investors achieve their goals. Rusty's also managed multiple mutual funds and hedge funds during his career. And prior, Rusty was the chief investment officer for Orion Advisor Solutions. And prior to that, he was the president and chief investment officer of CLS Investments. Before joining Orion in 2012, he served as the chief investment officer and managing director for a multi-billion-dollar registered investment advisor, Cobra Insight Management, in the greater Boston area, which is actually where I'm from. His 11-year tenure at the RIA included a 5-year span when the firm was owned by E-Trade Financial, where he also served as the senior market strategist for E-Trade Capital. Prior, Rusty was a senior analyst at Fidelity Management and Research in Boston, and additional work experience includes Thomson Reuters, General Electric, and as a cattle ranch hand in the Nebraska Sandhills. And he also received his Bachelor of Science in Management from Babson College in Wellesley, Mass. One of the three Bs, Bentley, Babson, and Bryant. I actually went to Bryant myself, so was a part of that decision-making process. He holds his CFA designation and is a member of the CFA Institute. And he's also a chartered market technician and is a member of the Market Technicians Association. So that is Rusty. On to Dr. Daniel Crosby. He is a psychologist and behavioral finance expert who helps organizations understand the intersection of minds and markets. Dr. Crosby's first book, Personal Benchmark, Integrating Behavioral Finance and Investment Management, was a New York Times bestseller. His second book, The Laws of Wealth, was named the best investment book of 2017 by the Axiom Business Book Awards and has been translated into 7 different languages. His latest work, The Behavioral Investor, is a comprehensive look at the neurology, physiology, and psychology of sound financial decision-making. So with that, Rusty, Dr. Crosby, really appreciate you both joining the show, especially after hearing that you've both been doing a lot of podcasts lately. Dr. Crosby, this is your 4th of the day, so hopefully you save some energy for us. But welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Nice to be here, David.
Great to be here. David, I sandbagged those other 3 so we could make this one great.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Well, hopefully they're not listening to this episode, so they don't find that out, but we'll be good. So, when we were talking initially, one of the things that came up in our conversation is having, say, sound investment strategies, are great, obviously, and the intention and, someone working with an advisor. But oftentimes advisors can, let's say, get lost in the weeds and perhaps be a little too analytical in the description of those investment strategies and the funds that they're invested in. One of the things that we talked about is how to actually communicate this stuff to clients in such a way that they can remember and understand. So whoever wants to, jump in, we'll play nice in the sandbox, so to speak, but kind of want to pose the question, how should advisors really communicate their value proposition in regards to their portfolios that they have to their clients?
Well, I mean, I think one of the keys to success eventually, I mean, the end game is really good investor experiences. And I think it's really important for the advisors to come up with investment strategies or build portfolios that they're confident in. Because I feel that a confident advisor will create a confident investor. The confidence just feeds on it. So it's just really important for the advisor to kind of understand the strategy and know that it's going to have good times, it's going to have bad times, but there is a kind of a philosophy fit between what they believe and how money should be managed and how they're actually building portfolios for their clients, for investors.
Dr. Crosby, what would you add to that?
It reminds me of sort of the early days of Samsung versus Apple in the smartphone wars. By all accounts, Samsung had this superior product in many respects, and they advertised it as such. And if you look at their advertisements from that era, it's kind of a bullet point by bullet point list of, we have this resolution, they have that resolution. And then Apple is taking a different approach, and they're not competing on speeds and feeds and MIPS and megahertz, as Steve Jobs famously said. He says, look, we're going to put 1,000 songs in your pocket. We're going to let you be able to see your kid's first day of school if you're not there. They sold features and not technical specifications. I think that we as an industry sometimes get bogged down in value versus growth, active versus passive, which is Greek to a lot of the people that we serve. And if they knew what all this meant and if they cared about it, they wouldn't need your help. And so I think a lot of times we try and sell folks on the technical specifications of something rather than the features and the way that these specific products meet a specific goal or a value that that client has. And so I think we follow the example of Apple and not of Samsung, and not tell them how the watch is made, but just sort of tell them what time it is as that relates to their goals and values.
I always love that analogy with the watch because it resonates immediately. I guess a follow-up question to that. So if we want to go down the path of features as opposed to the technical aspects of investing, can we kind of spend some time and think out loud and kind of list out some technical aspects that advisors commonly share with their clients, and then how you can actually take those technical aspects and communicate them as features so that we can kind of give advisors some language bites to be able to implement to their process? How can we kind of structure that?
So I'll take it from the behavioral angle. I ran these numbers recently and had my mind blown. I mean, I do this all day long and I couldn't believe how powerful these numbers were. So I looked at the 50-year numbers. If you had invested $10,000 50 years ago in a value index, that $10,000 today would be worth 2.1 million. Incredible growth. If you had put that in a growth index, that $10,000 would have become 1.7 million. And the average investor, though, didn't get 2 million. They didn't get 1.7 million. They got 415,000 because of their bad behavior over that time. So we spend all this time fighting about value versus growth, active versus passive, whatever thing we're spilling ink and wasting breath over at any given moment. And I think the most powerful thing that we can convey to our clients is this mix of assets was chosen for you for a couple of primary reasons. First, it's gonna, we expect it over the long term to generate appropriate returns for you to reach your goals. And second, it's moderate enough that you can take the ride. And I think that we need to emphasize that to them. That's one of the features we need to emphasize to them. And one of the things that we need to be thoughtful about. One of the podcasts that I was on today was with a very new retail investor, and he kept saying, why shouldn't I just buy the S&P 500? And, the answer is because the S&P 500 is very few people's, risk ride that they want to take. And so I think we have to convey to them that we are partners in this journey, and our ability to get there is only as good as their ability to take the ride. And we need to talk about how this portfolio has been crafted with respect to their individual values, goals, and personality with an eye to making sure that they can stay on the ride.
Yeah. The S&P is a horse a lot of investors just can't ride. It's absolutely true. I mean, I feel that, in my role as a strategist, it's just as Daniel said, there's the investment return and there's the investor return. And that difference is sort of that behavior gap. And there's a lot of things that go into that. And quite frankly, I actually think, financial advisors are part of that problem as well. But it's really about the education of how markets work and just keep it basic as much as possible. And then it's the encouragement that goes with it. And really the goal is keeping them balanced, making them stay the course, assuming they've already got that appropriate portfolio built. And it just comes back to education and the encouragement. And it's just keeping the message as simple as possible. I mean, it depends on the audience. I mean, I've had different audiences that I've spoken to over the course of my career. I mean, talk to traders and other analysts and individual investors and advisors. So it kind of depends on the audience in terms of how you're tailoring your message. But again, it just comes down to just kind of understanding that basic behavior. No, there's going to be volatility. There's going to be bad days, but over time, the market should be able to get you where you want to go if you're staying balanced and staying the course.
I want to dive deeper there with you, Rusty, in terms of the encouragement with clients. And I think encouragement in this scenario has kind of two sides to it. So when you think about when the market dropped during COVID, right, it just took a sharp downturn. Not only does the advisor need to encourage the client to stay the course, during that time period, but if I'm the advisor, I'm like, man, my revenue just dropped, forecasted dropped 20, 30% or more. And I need to stay encouraged. So what advice do you have to advisors for both staying encouraged themselves and them staying the course? And then also, what are some ways in which you can communicate that encouragement to the end client so that they don't freak out as well?
I always say there's three different hats that I wear. So, first of all, we're in the investment management business. So during those times of bear markets, it's tough. It's kind of a scary time. The second hat is as an investment manager, I think it's exciting. It's, things are on sale. I mean, how exciting is that? But the third and the most important, and really for all of us, is that investment counseling function. I mean, this is what all our training and experience is for. There are times like this. This is where we're really helping investors. What's really interesting is we're doing this podcast during a week where, we say this all the time. This is a historic week because think of some of these stats we have right now. Portfolio managers are the most pessimistic they have ever been, according to one survey, ever. That's crazy. The American Association of Individual Investors came out with their survey this morning, and it's the most bearish they've been since 1992. And then there's consumer sentiment, and consumers, no matter age, sex, political affiliation, socioeconomic level, they are super bummed out. So this is the time for investment counselors to really step up. I mean, it's our mission, it's our calling, is really to help people. And I think that has to override everything else. And just want to think too, it's easy for me to kind of say that because I think in our industry, you kind of have your classic investment managers, and then you have the people working with clients. And I think to work with clients, you have to obviously listen and be empathetic. You have to connect with them so you can feel their pain. Investment managers, though, they're kind of wired to be contrarian. So it's almost easier to say hey, the market's down, you should be buying it. So I realize there is a different kind of mindset there. But anyway, I just think it's a really important time for just to realize as investment counselors, this is what we're really here to do.
So a few more thoughts there, if I may. Brad Klontz, Dr. Brad Klontz and some of his colleagues did research on financial advisors coming out of the great financial crisis and found that the vast majority of them, I believe the number was 93%, but I can't quite be sure at this moment. But the vast majority of them showed clinical levels of anxiety or depression, or in some cases, even post-traumatic stress. So money touches every part of our lives. It is the number one stressor in the lives of Americans year after year after year. There's a study out this week saying that 84% of Americans say they're very stressed. What's the number one stressor? Inflation. So financial advisors are subject to this sort of empathy fatigue, this secondary traumatization. They have people in their offices who are worked up and stressed out and scared, and that rubs off if you're doing your job correctly, if you're being empathetic and kind and all the things you ought to be. And so I think self-care for financial advisors is just absolutely essential. And the need to put on your own oxygen mask first, before, if you're frazzled and you're worn out and you're stressed, you have nothing to give your clients. And we work in an enormously stressful profession. It needs to be said. And if it's only when we take good care of ourselves that we're able to really serve our clients.
Really well said.
Yeah, Dr. Crosby, I don't mean to keep saying this, but you're continually using the phrases that I love in terms of securing your mask before helping others and self-care. And I want to kind of go a little bit deeper on self-care because I'm a big believer in that. And we can probably couple that with securing your mask, before helping others. What are some of the things that an advisor can do on a daily basis to stay centered, stay right between the ears, and ensure that they can be that rock, so to speak, for their clients during these trying times, fully knowing that their revenue may be going down, their own personal assets may be going down, they're feeling all this angst from their client base. So whatever the normal person needs to do from a self-care perspective, I'd argue that the advisor needs to do even more because of all the bullets that they're taking, during that period of time. So what are some staples in, say, like a routine of an advisor do you think would be helpful to keep them on the course?
Yeah, no, great question. So the framework that I like to use when I think about this, and I'm very dorky. So I'll write these 5 things out and try and give myself a score on them. And I'd encourage people listening to kind of do the same. I'll give you a 5-part framework and just sort of rate yourself 1 to 10 and see how you're doing. So this framework was developed by Martin Seligman, who's the father of positive psychology, which is, not the study of what makes people broken or crazy, which is what most of clinical psychology is, but it's the study of what makes people great, what makes people flourish. And he calls it his PERMA model. So sort of the 5 elements of wellness. The first is positive experiences. So this is just fun stuff. This is going for a walk, going to the gym, eating an ice cream cone, going to Disney World, going to the movies, just doing enjoyable things, right? Are you doing enough of that? The second piece is engagement, which is meaningful, deep work. It could also be a hobby. Like I play guitar. That's kind of my engagement because sometimes, let's face it, your work can be frenetic. It can be putting out fires. It can be too many emails. It can be 100 things. But we need some sort of engagement or deep work, be that our actual work or be that a hobby. The R is relationships. So this is making sure our relationships are in a good place. The M is meaning. This is philanthropy, prayer, yoga, spirituality, charity work, working for something bigger than yourself. And the A is for advancement or achievement, which is just getting a little bit better today than you were yesterday. So that can be lifting heavier in the gym. That can be a faster mile time. That can be more billable hours. I mean, that could be 100 things, but just sort of keeping track of your progress and make sure you're making that incremental improvement. So this is as good and as robust a framework for thinking about your wellness as I know. And I'm right on board with you that this is doubly important for financial professionals because so much of this stuff is out of our control. It's that's so bad for your mental health. You think about the average financial advisor in Omaha, Nebraska, who's having a bad time because Putin invaded Ukraine. That's tough, right? That's tough. So we have to try and take the power back, take control back. And I think that 5-part model is a useful way to think about it.
In the PERMA model, is it pick 1 or, pick 2 of the examples that you shared for each of those letters and do that on a daily basis? Or how are you thinking about that? Because I think it's a good framework, but how does someone take that and put it into action?
Yeah, I mean, ideally you're doing well on all fronts. They're all important. So the reason I say pick 1 is because I think for a certain stripe of highly perfectionistic person, and many advisors are in that group, I think it becomes sort of a new thing to become anxious about, I'm not having enough fun. I got to have more fun today or whatever. So I'm just trying to get folks to work towards incrementalism and sort of take 1 step in the right direction. But yes, ideally, they're all important. And you would have, you're working for something bigger, you're making progress, you have strong relationships, your body's healthy, all that stuff's important. But I think it's best to start small to avoid overwhelm.
Cool.
every week on my podcast, I do ask the question towards the end, how a particular investment professional is performing at a high level. What are they doing both from a physical or mental standpoint? Because obviously it's really important, and I'm just creating an awareness and attention, and the answers have been all over the place, but it's pretty cool. Just about everybody has some sort of practice in place. I think I had a 20-something say, I don't do anything. But other than that, I mean, everybody's trying to do something. I think it's really important.
So I want to kind of add on to that because I'm a big believer that there's, whether it's the PERMA model or whatever other kind of model or framework that's out there, they're all to a certain degree very valuable. It's just a matter of kind of picking something and actually following through with it. So for me, I'm a big believer on the securing, your mask before helping others. So to the degree that, it's helpful for folks, I don't take any client meetings until 10 o'clock in the morning. So when I wake up in the morning, my routine essentially is waking up, journaling, writing down what's going to make today great. What are the 3 things that I'm grateful for? Things along those lines. I then go have some lemon water, go for a walk. From there, I'm listening to an audiobook and developing business, right? So moving things forward. And then once all that stuff is done, right, I'm learning something new, I'm moving my body, then it's okay, let me give myself up to everyone else for the remainder of the day. So I think that we're similar in that sense, or it's a similar routine, but it's more so literally stacking all those things at the beginning of the day. The idea of, you win the morning, you win the day, type of thing. Otherwise, you can have a bunch of excuses why at the end of the day, you don't have time for any of that stuff. And then you start to fall into that spiral of, only doing stuff for other people. And that's not healthy long-term.
Right on. I do the lemon water first before the journaling, but I totally hear what you're saying. Exactly. Right on.
I have this weird thing where I'll wake up and I'll go in my journal, before I actually even go up and use the restroom, where it's like, okay, I got to get through this first before I can earn that relief in the morning.
That makes sense.
So I want to, kind of talk through. So if I'm an advisor and let's say the market is all of a sudden, taking a turn for the worst, and I have a book of business of 100 or 200 clients or what have you, what's my first thing that I need to do to get ahead of this with my client base? Is it broad communication? Is it one by one? How do I pick who I call first and who I call last? That obviously takes time to get through 100 or 150 phone calls, never mind the actual conversations. What is my go-to thing that I need to do as an advisor if and when the market takes a downturn to make sure to get ahead of, the client's emotion?
Well, a couple of different thoughts on that. So if things are really looking bad, really looking dark, the advisor needs to take the initiative and just reach out in some way, however he or she does it, and just stay in touch. I mean, I've heard that so many times over the years. If somebody's just not staying in touch, particularly in those situations, that's ultimately a relationship that's not going to work. That said, there is something about, I think a lot of people in the industry are a little trigger happy when there is some bad news that jump on it and send out communications that actually ultimately scares people, because I just feel there's too much trigger happy stuff. So think about it. If you kind of got a normal sequence of how you're communicating with investors and you're sending out something special, let's say you have your clients pretty well trained, thinking long-term, try to shut out the noise as much as you possibly can. And so they're kind of on board with that. But if all of a sudden you send out an email or some communication saying hey, don't worry about all the news today, that actually a lot of times somebody goes, wait a second, something must be scary. You're sending me an email telling me to relax. So I think it's kind of a fine line is kind of wait till you see the white of their eyes sort of thing, because ultimately you're just trying to keep clients staying balanced and staying the course.
So there's some cool research that was done at the robo-advisor Betterment that I think dovetails nicely with what Rusty's talking about. So Betterment's thoughtful about behavior. They have a chief behavior guy, Dan Egan, who's wonderful. And they were doing these blast emails because, of course, they're a robo-advisor. So they were doing these blast emails on volatile days in the market, sort of indiscriminately, just sending them to all their clients. And they found that it was actually inducing a lot of bad behavior, because people who were doing what they should have, which is just living their lives and sort of ignoring the markets, we're getting these, to Rusty's points, these sort of asynchronous, strange emails from their asset manager saying, hey, nothing to see here, nothing to worry about. And they're like, of course, worried. And so what they found was they waited to see if people logged into their Betterment accounts, and then they could ask questions like, hey, how you feeling? And they would only respond sort of with a scalpel and not a hacksaw to the people who were actually worried. So I think, I love what Rusty said. We should be doing this all along. We should be educating all along. We should have them in the right portfolios all along and communicating regularly. And we do need to identify the particular clients who are prone to sort of dislocations when the markets get volatile. But I don't think we need to, mass reach out to every person outside of our normal outreach every time there's a little hiccup in the market. I think we could do more harm than good.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you. And the reason why I have this question is, to a certain degree, it's kind of the opposite of what you just said. So I want to kind of paint the picture and just get your thoughts on that. So I have clients, John and Matt out of Florida. They run an RIA. Awesome guys. And to help frame this, I will say that one of the things that they are fantastic at is their social media presence. And it's a mix of educational videos around investing and planning, lifestyle, personal development. Like, it's a whole hodgepodge of stuff. And what they do is their CFA that they have on staff sends out on a monthly basis, sends out a video, both a written, and a video market commentary that just kind of chats through current circumstances. And there's been a couple instances where, that's been sent out during, call it the shaky time in the market, if you will. And at the end of every email, they always say, if you would have any questions about, current market circumstances and you would like to chat, there's a link in the email that brings you directly to our calendar, and we're more than happy to have a conversation with you. And what they've found is, even, when COVID first hit or the Ukraine stuff that's going on, they get maybe 2 or 3 people, there are 200 or so people that they're working with that actually book a time. But what they get on top of that is a bunch of positive email correspondence in reply to that. And then when they have actual meetings with them, they talk about how much they enjoy not just the communication on a frequent basis, but also the format in a video, because the client on the receiving end can, hear the tone, whereas, email is up to interpretation a lot of times. So I guess my question is, or what I'm trying to understand is, do you think that broad communication is okay if it's kind of already in place and not like a one-off email? And do you feel as if including it in the format of a video helps drive the point home and kind of settle any angst that they make from reading that email? What's your perspective on that?
I think what your clients are doing is brilliant on a couple of fronts. One of the keys here is that it's not jarring. It's not asynchronous. It's not out of place. Like, in your monthly market commentary, there will be months when the market is rough, and it would be crazy not to talk about that. But it's not this sort of out of the blue email that says, hey, don't panic. It's part of a larger framework that they've come to expect. And that framework sets the expectation that, like, hey, we're here when you need us. We're going to be candid about the ups and downs of the markets. So I think they've set a brilliant precedent. And, we've all read the research about how much of communication is nonverbal. And that's another reason why I think that advisors need to take care of themselves and need to engage in sort of the self-care that we talked about earlier. Is you can say the right things to your clients, but if you don't believe them yourself, and if you yourself are stressed about your own business and your own financial situation or whatever other thing, that gets transmitted to your clients in a very real way. So I think that what your clients are doing is wholly consistent with what we're talking about here, in that it's consistent, got some behavioral panache to it insofar as they're using video. I think it's great.
I'm kind of like Charlie Munger here, and Daniel's like Warren Buffett. So what Charlie usually says after Warren speaks is like, I have nothing to add. So that's what I'm going to say here. It's just, what can I say? So good.
I do have kind of a funny story. So back before I got into consulting, I was an advisor and I was at a firm that was, let's just call it very sales oriented and less kind of like advising oriented. And I'm saying what I'm going to hit on is what you said, Dr. Crosby, about a lot of communication is done non-verbally. And what I learned the hard way is that if you have commission breath, everyone can smell it and it stinks. And therefore you push them away. So I second the comment about a lot of communication coming through non-verbals like body language and things like that.
This is the book that I'm going to write one day. I'll get Rusty to co-author it with me. But
yeah,
people have a sixth sense for intention, right? Like people have like commission breath. I like that. People have a sixth sense for intention. And if you try to say the right words for the wrong reason or in a disingenuous way, people can sense that, people can smell that. And so that's why I think it's so important, again, to go back to the self-care. People are very tuned in to what you're actually trying to do.
So before we transition to the next segment, which is about some books, I kind of want to try and summarize what was discussed today in sort of sequential order, if you will, and feel free to, chime in with anything that I may have missed or perhaps that we didn't get to that can help color between the lines. So if I'm hearing you correctly, in order to have a thriving business, thriving mindset, happy clients, whether the market's crushing it up or, crashing down, first and foremost, in order to be the best advisor for your clients, you need to be the best version of yourself mentally, physically, emotionally, and take care of yourself no matter what as one of your number one, if not the number one priorities. Number two is ensuring that throughout the client relationship, specifically during, I'd say, the discovery and the onboarding process, making sure that you're doing a good job identifying what that client's vision is, a big picture, letting them know that with not just the investment portfolio, but the overall financial plan, if constructed appropriately, can withstand some setbacks along the way, and you'll still be on pace to actually hit that goal. And then ultimately making sure that if you're going to choose to communicate the bad stuff when it happens, you have to make sure that it's kind of sandwiched in with all the other stuff that's going on, good, bad, or indifferent. So if you're going to communicate this stuff regularly, you need to communicate it regularly, right? And kind of make a habit out of it. And really ensuring that from an expectation standpoint throughout the relationship, you're constantly bringing them back to what you found out at the beginning, which is their vision and the thing that they're working towards. Am I missing anything that we chatted through today to be able to sum that up kind of in a succinct way, or anything that maybe we didn't talk about today that you think would be helpful to add to that framework?
Sounds pretty good to me.
Awesome. So let's transition and appreciate all the perspective. Obviously, a couple of smart dudes on here. It helps a lot to be able to share that with advisors. So with that being said, this next segment is very intentional. So if this is your first time listening to one of our episodes, one of the things that we kind of realize with advisors is oftentimes we can find ourselves an echo chamber within our industry and always, reading and learning about stuff within our industry. But the reality is there's so much great information out there, whether it be marketing, mindset. And I want this segment to basically encourage you to be able to pick up a book, read something, and apply it to your life. So that can be overwhelming. So one of the things that we do with all of our guests is ask what one of their favorite books is. So Rusty, I'm going to start with you. I know when we were chatting, you mentioned that, well, there's a lot of good books, but if I had to pick one, it would be A Guide to the Good Life, The Ancient Art of Stoic Joy by William Irvine.
Yeah.
Why'd you pick that book?
Well, first of all, I ask this question all the time, and I don't recall last time somebody did ask me this. So the way I sort of qualified and came up with this selection is I had to think, what is a book that I've read multiple times, that I've gifted multiple times, that I think could work both personally and professionally? It's a book you could sit down and slam in one reading, but quite frankly, it could be read right before you go to sleep at night. It's basically about Stoic philosophy. And there's, some contemporary authors who are more popular right now, like Ryan Holiday, who writes a lot of good stuff. And of course, there's the classics that goes back like Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius. You could go with them. But I think we're talking about self-care and, Stoic philosophy, which again could be applied even in a professional sense, it focuses you on what can you control. There's external factors you can't control, but you can control internal factors. There's certain concepts such as amor fati, just love your fate. You should have gratitude for what you have in your life. And memento mori, which is the concept that, we're going to die someday. So that puts kind of a sense of urgency on living to your fullest even now. So I think there's a lot of really practical advice, again, that could be applied both professionally and personally in that book.
Awesome. That's one that I actually have not checked out yet. So I'll have to grab me a copy. And by copy, I mean the audiobook. But appreciate that. Dr. Crosby, what book did you choose?
So Rusty will be pleased to know that I have a memento mori bracelet that my daughter made me. I'm such a fan.
Nice.
I'm such a fan of that phrase, and I try to incorporate it. I'm more of an existentialist guy, so I'll give an existential philosophy book, and it's, of course, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
Ooh, I love that
It's
book.
my favorite book of all time. But, I think a lot of folks have read that. I consider it kind of like your ticket to the human family. Like if you haven't read Man's Search for Meaning, what are you doing? Go check it out immediately. It's all about why and the power of meaning to get you through even the worst times. But I would encourage people to check out existentialism and stoicism broadly. I think there's so many lessons about how to make life richer, how to use some of the tough stuff in life, our impermanence and things like that to actually lead to a richer, deeper, more fulfilling life. So love Rusty's suggestion, and I'll throw mine on the pile as well.
Nice.
I say this for your book, Dr. Crosby, only because I have read it. That's a book that I probably picked it up a few years ago, and I've read it a few times since then. It's one of the good staples, sort of like a, Think and Grow Rich, read it at the beginning of every year. So there's typically 3, 4, 5 books that I weave in and just repeatedly, read those over and over again to kind of keep you in check.
Man's Search for Meaning is such a great book, but even though it looks little, it is kind of deceiving because you just don't really slam that out in one read. It's just so heavy. You got to take your time with it.
Well, usually I'll listen to books at like 1.7, 2x speed on audiobook. And that's one of those that, I slow down to the 1x, make sure I'm actually, following along because it is pretty dense. But gentlemen, I very much appreciate you joining. If I'm an advisor and I happen to, which I know is kind of rare these days, but I happen to not be utilizing Orion just yet, where's the best place for them to go to check you guys out and see what it's like to work with you guys?
Well, I'll start off with, because Daniel's got really the goodies, but a lot of my stuff, which is really about kind of the education and encouraging advisors and investors about the markets, it is on orionportfoliosolutions.com. And when you go there, there is a resource tab and there's a drop-down menu, and then there's a financial advisor success hub. So there's a lot of materials there. There is some stuff kind of talking about what the markets are doing now, but really the focus is more on materials that could be used in more of an investment counseling function, talking about the markets and particular strategies on the platform. But Daniel's got a great website and all kinds of good stuff.
Thank you. So for us, you would go to orion.com/practice-management. Orion.com/BFI, BEFI will get you to some of our behavioral finance resources, but either one will get you there. So quick plug there. We have a ton of CE. You can get most of it around behavioral science. All of it's free. So come and get it. I would also encourage you to listen to Rusty's podcast and my podcast, Standard Deviations, because I think that's where Rusty and I share a lot of value each week that is, again, free to advisors, and come join us.
Awesome. Well, for those of you who are listening, if you could do us a solid, share this episode, leave us a review on iTunes. We'd really appreciate it. With all the sharing that you've done, all the reviews that you've left for us, we are now ranked in the top 2.5% of all podcasts globally. So I just wanted to thank all of you, including our guests, for making that happen when they share the show. And obviously, when the guests are interesting, people flock to the episodes. So appreciate you guys for sharing. Appreciate you guys for leaving reviews. And we will catch you on the next episode. Rusty, Dr. Crosby, appreciate your time.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.